That is always so loud. This meeting is being recorded. All right, another episode of the Scoring Compass podcast with Alena Gourley of Celebrate Every Step. I'm going to talk about what that is in a second. But I met you. It would have been what, 3 weeks ago now? Time goes by so quick.
I
Two or
know.
three
End of September. Yeah.
at the Johnstown Masonic event conference center for their Supernatural Expo, which was a blast. How's it been going since then? Because you've been to a few other expos and conferences since that
Yeah.
time, right?
Yeah, it's spooky season, so that's the season of witches and paranormal and past lives and crystals and all that kind of fun stuff, and that is one part of my business. So it's been an event I think every single weekend since I saw you.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that you're keeping busy.
Yeah.
Is it all kind of primarily around kind of the Pennsylvania, kind of New England area, or do you move around a lot to some other locations?
I do move around a lot. I have part of my business in Arizona. I have a bunch of clients in California. I can see people all over the world. So I'm based locally out of Western Pennsylvania, and people come to see me in person, but I can do online sessions as well. So I see people all over. But I'm born and raised in Western Pennsylvania. So it's where my heart is.
All right. Well, speaking of your work, we'll get into that. I mentioned before, you are with Celebrate Every Step.
Mhm.
Going to leave a link to your website in the description to this video,
Okay.
celebrateeverystep.com. Right, you are a licensed social worker, as your website says. Right, you help people access
Correct.
the best versions of themselves through hypnotherapy, meditation, past life regressions. Um, you do oracle readings. You did one for myself, which we'll talk about.
Hmm.
You also, according to your website, have a blue belt in jujitsu and
I
competed
do.
in several ultra distant races in sandals.
Yes.
How is what I saw that part. What is it like? I mean, I'm in a wheelchair. I don't know what it's like running,
Yeah,
period.
I
But
was gonna say, I don't dig me into a hole with this question.
I feel like running in sandals would be very difficult. I don't know.
It is, but it's better for our actually foot health, bone health, skin health, muscle and tendon health. So when I transitioned probably 15 years ago, it was a very slow process. So if I was doing a 5 mile run, I would run 4 miles and 3/4 in shoes and then switch to the last quarter mile in sandals and just built up from there. So yeah, my longest race in sandals has been 69 miles. And my uncle, who makes them, is 76, and he has run multiple 100 milers in his sandals.
That is very cool. That has nothing to do with anything other than I thought that was
No.
a cool set.
Yeah.
So,
Interesting fun fact.
the purpose of this, and I kind of discussed this offline, right? Of this podcast in particular, right, is to kind of the mission statement is to explore the ways Freemasonry is relevant to, and this was the key point, right? Relevant to the communities in which it's located.
Mhm.
And so that's why so much of the emphasis and the focus of this podcast is on Masonic buildings and also the buildings' relationship to the communities they're located in and the events that they hold for the public and things of that nature, right? So, with your work, you mentioned we talked about this, right? You go to a lot of different events and a lot of different conferences on the supernatural and spooky season.
Mhm.
Was this your first the Supernatural Expo? Was it your first time taking part in an event in a Masonic temple or a Masonic event center?
I think so, because I was actually thinking about this because I do a guest spot at a massage place in Latrobe, and after the fact, I realized that it's a Masonic building. And so then I was trying to kind of think about I know I've been in other Masonic temples because I love the all of the symbols and all of the intricacies of it. But I think this is my first time that I did an event at the Masonic Lodge. Oh no, you know what? There's one in Altoona that I've been at before. Do you know that
Okay,
one? Yeah.
I don't. I'm not even sure where's Altoona. I've heard the
It
name, I
would
feel
be
like.
so, um, the you were in Johnstown and I don't even know.
It's
I just know
somewhere.
it's like it's somewhere. So I lived in a little town called Strongstown, and you would go one direction to Altoona, and then you would go the other direction to Johnstown. So it is another kind of not small town, but it's one of the bigger towns that's not really a city, kind of where you were in Johnstown. So there's like Johnstown, Altoona, and then you get to State College or go the opposite direction for Pittsburgh. So people from my area would be familiar with Altoona, but we go there for the circus, um, and things like that too. So I do have a couple experiences in Masonic temples.
You did bring up something interesting, with you taking part or being in massage, which is located in a Masonic temple. A lot of Masonic buildings, people don't realize it. They often rent out space, or they will, they'll
Hmm.
own a building, and the Masons will meet on the second floor, but the first floor will be home to any number of businesses that could rent
Hmm.
out. And that happens in a lot of different locations. Here, I can, from my experiences at Guelph, Ontario, Brighton, Michigan. Um, so yeah, so that's a pretty common thing. A lot of people will go to Masonic buildings and not even realize necessarily they're in a Masonic building, depending on what
Oh
they're going
yeah.
there for.
Well, and that one I know we're talking about Johnstown, but the one in Latrobe is massive. Like it is the whole city block. And so the whole bottom, like you said, are all rented out office spaces. But then there's a main entrance. And so then that seems to be where the Masonic things happen.
Yeah, and I think another, the classic example of that is probably in Detroit, right? So many people, especially from Windsor, right? So many people think of the Detroit Masonic Temple as being a concert space, which it is. They
Hmm.
don't realize it's also, a very active Masonic building. So
Yeah.
I think that stuff is really cool as well.
Hmm.
The you from your experience, when you let's say, focusing on Johnstown, because it was the second year the event was held, but this was your first year there, correct?
Correct. Yes. I donated a kidney last year at that time. So I couldn't
So you
make
were
it.
kind of busy.
I was busy.
You had some stuff happening at the time.
Yeah.
Although good on you, and this is nothing to
Yes.
do with, on a completely separate note, I'm a big,
Yeah.
big believer in organ donation. So
Oh, good. Me
good
too.
for that.
Yeah.
Organ donation, blood donation, people should be doing all that stuff.
Absolutely. I just registered to be a bone marrow on the bone marrow registry. So, yeah, it's
Good.
good
Yeah.
stuff.
I got up to like, how many times? I donated blood, like, I think it was up to 14 or 15. And it's been a while. I got to donate again. The problem is the clinic's not in Windsor anymore. It's in Chatham or something.
Um,
But it's way past the time, so I can donate again for sure.
oh, good.
Um, so yeah, so donated a kidney last year. You got the call this year. Um,
Yes.
had you ever been to either Johnstown before or the Johnstown Masonic Center before?
Yes. So actually, my family is from that area. So my great grandparents on my grandmother's side are buried at the Grandview Cemetery. I don't know if you went up to that, but that is where all of the Johnstown flood victims were buried. So it kind of overlooks the whole city. So my great grandparents were from there, lived there, and then died there. And then my grandfather, my dad's dad, worked at the Johnstown steel mill for his entire career. So he was worked his way up and he was the boss man there until he retired. And he just died 2 years or 3 years ago at 96.
Had you ever had the chance to visit the Masonic Center itself?
I had never been to the Masonic Center, but I used to work at Conemaugh Hospital, which is just up the road. And so I'd been past it many times, but had never had the opportunity to go in there. So I was excited to explore while I was there and definitely took advantage because I spoke up on the third floor. And so they have a little museum up there. And so, um, I'm 43, but my mom and dad came to my talk. And so
That's awesome.
my dad and I walked around and looked at all of the pictures and they had some of the old uniforms and medals and yeah, it was a really neat little kind of museum up there. So we walked around and took it all in and um and then we were in the big auditorium up top that looked like it had all the fancy chairs. And I apologize for not knowing the names of these things, but it looked like where they met up in that room.
Yeah, there are two. Well, there's one lodge room and one York Rite room, and I mean the names are I don't think that important, right? What's important is kind of the feeling you get being in the room
Yeah.
and kind of your experience there, or your experiences being in the room and the feelings that kind of associated with those
Hmm.
experiences. What was the weekend itself like, for you? I mean, it seemed to me like both I was there for both days, and both they seemed pretty well attended.
Hmm.
Um, what was your experience like, just in terms of the expo itself and meeting with the people, and also your experience working with the different, like Sean and the different organizers, the
Hmm.
Masons, and getting ready for the event?
Yeah, Sean was great. I did a podcast episode for my podcast with Leah, so I got to know her a little bit better because I had not met them prior to the event. But so Leah is did a great job of organizing and speaking with me and explaining the event, and then Sean was awesome day up the first day helping get set up and get everybody in the right spot, and he brought together or they both brought together some really amazing vendors, and then we even had some of the famous people with the mountain monsters guys. So it was a really well put on event, and they did a wonderful job of bringing in not only the vendors but then the extra speakers and the Ouija board museum and those different things like that.
Yeah, that Ouija board museum was awesome, by the way. I thought
It
that
was
was so
so
cool.
cool.
And was there anything that, because you mentioned, you've been in Masonic temples before. I don't know if you had checked out any other lodge rooms before, or any of the other parts of the buildings. But from your experience with, giving the talk and taking the tour and seeing the museum, like, was there anything that stood out to you, or surprised you about the building, or things that you still kind of remember and think back to from those tours?
Yeah, I love how elaborate they are. I am a big lover of history and ornate and kind of pomp and circumstance. I love the over the top kinds of things. I am a Leo, so I love the showmanship. So I love that piece of where there's a meaning behind everything. So it's like that layered meaning, but then it's like the ornate and the details and the big chairs and the huge ceilings. And so Johnstown, I don't know how it is in other places, but even the third floor, that ceiling was so high. So I love taking in all of those kinds of details and looking at things that we just don't build like that today. So that's what I like most about buildings like that is you just don't see new builds where they're doing that much woodwork and detail and things like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there's something really special about historical buildings, and I mean, to its credit, Johnstown I know is working really hard on getting its historical designation, which can open up all
Mhm.
sorts of opportunities for it, and would be well deserved to get that historical designation as well.
Yeah.
Um, and then in terms of your actual kind of your job, right, and being there for those 2 days, did anything stick out to you particular about some of the interactions you had, or even working with the other vendors? I know your tables were there was obviously enough space to walk around, but you were pretty close to some other vendors. So what was it like interacting with the people there, and the customers and your fellow vendors?
Yeah, so I do attend a fair amount of expos and kind of shows where other psychic, medium, Reiki, crystal, all of those kinds of things get together. But I was really deliberate this year in choosing events, and I love the paranormal. I love cryptids, and so this event really stood out to me as kind of quote unquote my people. So I really enjoyed getting to know some of the other vendors. There were enough lulls that I could walk around and meet people, which might kind of sound silly to some people where they would think you'd want to be working the whole time, but when you have that many awesome people all together, it's really nice to be able to walk around and meet people and talk to people. And the Mountain Monsters guys really liked me, and so I gave them my card and told me, "Hey, if the network needs a past life regressionist or a hypnotherapist, you knew where to find me." So, it was really fun networking and meeting people. It was just a great group of people that came together that day.
And you talk about it on your website, right? The kind of the goal, your driving force, your passion, as you say, right, is helping people.
Mhm.
The d- to what extent do you think that, like, did you find there was a mix of people coming to the event who were there looking for like specific things, looking for help, or did you find it was more at the event, more people just kind of curious about the event itself, or do you mean,
Yeah.
my suspicion is in some cases, um, there may be a little bit of both. I'm assuming, right? People not
Mhm.
necessarily knowing the help they're looking for, but thinking there may be something there.
Yeah, I think right now I've heard this term thrown around, and I absolutely agree that we're in an epidemic of loneliness. And so I think that events like this bring together other people who are interested in the same things as you are who's showing up. And so then you do get the chance to meet other people or talk to the vendors, and like I said, network where you're, exchanging cards and exchanging phone numbers and becoming Facebook friends and things like that, because everybody needs community. And that's what I most love about these kind of events is it does begin to feel like a community. And this one I'm excited to come back again because I know that I will look forward to seeing some of the vendors again. And then you start to see the same attendees coming to these kinds of things too. So I think for most of the people that I talked to that weekend, the majority were coming for kind of fun and entertainment, which is great, which we all need. And then there was a another portion that sat down with me that really did want to connect on a deeper level to maybe a loved one that had passed or look at some of their past life information and how that's affecting their current life. So they were looking at more of the deeper healing or deeper connection. So, yeah, I think it was a good mix of people.
It's interesting you bring up the epidemic of loneliness, which is something we've kind of discussed on the podcast and in some of our written stuff as well. Um, it's interesting though that I think that you're bringing it up because it would feel as though a lot of your work would be kind of hyper individualized. If you so like
Mhm.
past life regressions, it's obviously going to be very personal, or even broader sense, right? Social work and things of that nature. It can feel kind of like a very individualized experience.
Mhm.
But it seems like based on what you're saying, it is possible that kind of these things, the services you provide or your work can also help to maybe foster some connections and foster some supports for people. Because my suspicion is a lot of times what people are struggling with is isolation and social
Mhm.
isolation, right? And um, your work may provide some benefits or some ways to alleviate that people might
Mhm.
not be thinking about.
Yeah, I kind of come at it in a twofold way. I do try to build community where I offer classes, and some are in person and some are online. But also, a lot of times people are very nervous or even have anxiety or panic attacks when they try to go out and meet people, or they lack confidence, or they don't want to bother people. Lots of wounds, usually from childhood. And so when we can go in and heal some of those wounds, offer them a different perspective, then they do have more confidence to get out and about. They do have more confidence to make new friends. They do have more confidence to pursue the things that they're passionate about. And so, yeah, I am big on trying to help people not rely on me, but get them to a place where they can go out and create a community in their own world too.
I'm not sure if you've been keeping track of it, or maybe just maybe even on an informal basis, but over the past, several years, have you been seeing an increase in people coming to you and expressing feelings, coming to you either professionally or personally or both, expressing feelings of loneliness or or struggling with isolation?
100%. Way, way up. I think it even started before COVID. Um, w- I don't want to get into politics, but I do feel like prior to COVID, a lot of families in my area had been fractured because of some political things. And then the COVID really split up a lot of families because certain families believe certain things. And then I found too that people, once they had permission to not go places, then they started to not go places that were even good for them. And I know that doesn't make rational sense, but that's what I have noticed over the last 4 years that, or well, I guess it'd be three, but that they just say no to everything instead of saying, well, actually, this is something that I would really like to do. And so I'm going to make the effort. They just are like a no across the board. And I don't know if it was because we were all so overwhelmed and burnt out, or if anxiety crept in, or exactly what it is that caused that. But I do notice people just not showing up for things like they used to.
Well, it's and this is something that I've been struggling with a lot, or not struggling was not the right word. Trying to, I guess, struggling to figure out the answer to it, right? Because obviously, Freemasonry is kind of by definition a. I mean, people need to show up,
Mm-hmm.
otherwise, it doesn't really work, right? And
Yeah.
there's kind of the legalistic reasons of, lodges have a quorum, so you need a minimum number of people to show up just to make your meeting legal.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
different jurisdictions in Ontario, it's seven. There's different
Mm.
jurisdictions have different requirements, but I mean,
Okay.
you could argue, but more from the, you know, it's almost similar to, and it's something that drives me crazy, even though I'm not, religious myself, but it's something you kind of hear with this idea of like religious versus spiritual, in the sense of
Mm-hmm.
the people who say like, I'm a Freemason, but you never see them taking part in any lodge activities, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they're a Freemason in their heart type of idea, right? And it's this idea of like, well, no, you kind of got to show up,
Yeah.
and be part of it. And you hear that with other things as well. Like, I think of it in terms of spirituality. There are some people who, never attend a church, but
Mm-hmm.
they're X in their heart, whatever it might be, right? It seems that things have become kind of hyper personalized in a way, where it's
Mm-hmm.
like you don't need other people to be the thing, right? Which seems to me kind of probably pretty. I don't know. That seems to me that it would be that's a challenge that a lot of groups are facing, churches
Mm-hmm.
and civil organizations and parent teacher associations, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
whatever this group is, it seems that they're all really kind of struggling in that area.
Absolutely. I mean, we just left flag football and even that my husband coaches our younger son and our older son because to even get coaches that will show up to things, and he coaches baseball as well because I mean, he loves it. He loves to coach, and there's not that many dads that can commit to it. So I don't know if it's the individualized. I know people work crazy hours now and just so spread thin and just over scheduled. And I know we've made an effort to try to not do that. And but it's hard. I'm an entrepreneur. So if I don't show up to things, I don't get paid. So, I have to kind of spread myself thin in some ways, but in other ways, it's like, no, I scheduled my day so I could be at work, I could go to the game, and then I could get on this podcast after the game. And so I think we do need a reckoning of what our priorities are, because if people don't show up for um Mason meetings, if they don't show up to coach flag football, then everything crumbles. And so we have to look at what's really important to us and what do we want standing after at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, and right, what's so interesting is kind of there were some people who were I guess, the Cassandras of their time in the 90s talking about this, right? The most famous would be Robert Putnam with his book Bowling Alone, which was a
Mhm.
great book. And then I guess that just I just discovered today actually it became a movie, or they kind of did a movie based on the book, called Join or Die, which seems to
Mm.
me to be a very ominous, a very ominous title. It sounds almost like a horror movie, but it's actually just based on, the death isn't dying of the individual. It's the death of kind of a lot of other things for understand, like
Mhm.
society as a whole. Although, and I'm sure you found this as well, right? There's all sorts of evidence that points to the more social connections people have, the more likely they are to be able to recover from health incidents and live longer, and all the positive health effects
Yeah,
as well. Which so I think it's great to hear that not only do you work with people individually to you work with people to make sure that they're doing well on their own, but also that they have the confidence and kind of are able to overcome whatever barriers they are facing to try to form those social connections as well.
absolutely. It's something that I feel very strongly about. I attended the International Association for Suicide Prevention in Slovenia last year, and that was the research across the board was connection. Everybody needs connection. Every mental health marker improves when there is more connection. So it's something I'm super duper passionate about.
Do you find that passion and understanding that helps you deal with some of those things you were talking about earlier of, you're an entrepreneur, so you're busy. You're also a mother, so you're busy. You're also,
Mhm.
a community member, so you're busy. And so you have all these different things on your plate that you're spinning. And when you um, do kind of get tired or burnt out or whatever it is, do you find that kind of that knowledge of the importance of connection and the importance of your work, that passion is what kind of drives you to keep going and maybe take the extra, you know, spend the night on a podcast, for example, or whatever it is you
Yes.
might be doing?
Absolutely, absolutely. If I didn't feel like I was making an actual difference in people's lives, whether that's my kids or the community or my clients, then I would have quit a long time ago. Because if entrepreneurship is not for the faint of heart, but it is the people who I get the messages or the notes or the emails saying thank you, the work that we did together launched me into starting my own business or launched me into taking up trail running or launched me into starting to backpack overnight backpack or just any number of things, so it doesn't have to be what my ideas of connection are. What I'm passionate about is helping them find what their ideas of connection are. So it could be jujitsu, but it could also be masonry, or it could be volunteering at um, the a breakfast at the church, or so finding whatever they are passionate about. But yes, that's absolutely what keeps me going, is knowing that it truly does help people to feel better and function better.
The kind of and this is something I think is interesting about your work, and we brought it up at the start, right? Jujitsu, the running, the marathon running, um, like that seems to be something really interesting to talk about as well. Like the combination of taking care of yourself physically as well as mentally and spiritually,
Hmm.
and although that's even an interesting point. I kind of wanted to jump on this a little bit because I've heard this kind of distinction made in Freemasonry, and I'm curious if you like mental health and spiritual health.
Hmm.
Do you kind of view those as, or and even physical health, if you want to combine all three? Like, do you view them as separate entities? Do you think that they kind of are one and the same? Um, because there are some people who, even though Freemasonry is not a religion and nor should it be considered,
Hmm.
right? There are some people who find or who will say that they find spiritual well-being from it. I tend to kind of shy away from that or
Hmm.
recoil a bit. I prefer, the idea of mental health improvement. But from your perspective as a professional in the field, would you consider them the same or different, or how would you distinguish those as well as then bringing the physical well-being side of it?
Yeah, I think we have to look at all of them. And that's why I started my business. I started out in community mental health as a therapist. And I was working for an organization, so I had to follow their rules and their tenets. But what I felt like was missing was that talk about spiritual well-being. And that doesn't mean that people have to believe what I believe spiritually, but we have to look at what their spiritual beliefs are. So I think bringing the whole person, body, mind, heart, and soul all together is really important. And it doesn't mean religion. So that can be nature. That can be, I know you don't want to call Freemasonry your religion, but if it gives you that boost that speaks to your soul, to me, that is a spiritual thing for you. So I feel like lots of things can be spiritual. When I look at a beautiful sky and those rays of the sun are coming through the clouds just perfectly, that feels like a spiritual event for me. Um, it could be for other people. Going to church is what feels spiritual for them. Praying is what feels spiritual for them. I view spirituality as a very broad category. And so that is a big piece of what I help people find, like what speaks to your soul. um and then we can talk about religion if that's something they want to work on. I actually see a lot of people with religious trauma, and so we have to unpack if they've been in a cult or in a religion where they were abused or traumatized in some way. So we work on healing that wound so that they can find some type of spirituality that works for them. So my belief, what I see in my people that come to me, they need the spiritual, they need the mental and emotional piece, and then we do talk about physical. So um I believe, in what I've seen in my practice, is that when people have difficult things that they go through, they can store it in their body. So if you go through a trauma, but not even a it doesn't even have to be a big T trauma. It could be a breakup, or it can be grief. If we don't fully deal with it, fully process it, we can kind of tuck it into places in our body. So I know for me, my son died in 2001, and I feel like a lot of my pain went into my hips. And so when I kind of check in with myself, if my hips are bothering me, then I'm going to say, "Hey, have you slowed down enough to really feel your feelings around his loss and those emotions?" So I do a lot with people, not only in finding physical outlets, but also making sure that they're taking good physical care of their body in releasing emotions too.
I think that brings up an interesting point as well about the role of, um, I mean, any civic or civil organization. We can use Freemasonry or anything else in kind of healing uh, trauma or healing an individual, or whether or not that is the purpose
Mhm.
of an organization, right?
Yeah.
Like from your experience, if there is somebody who is, let's say that they are aware enough to know that they are struggling with some type of unresolved traumas, or they're aware that they
Mhm.
have some issues in their past, um, where would you say, so let's say it's say it's a man or a woman, right? There is an order of women Freemasons.
Mhm.
To what extent do you think that they should be looking at joining a community group or a civic group right away to try to deal with it, or do you think it might be more appropriate to start with somebody such as yourself, or kind of one-on-one therapy before they,
Mhm.
because I do sometimes suspect in some cases, and I've seen this in Freemasonry and others, where there's, I don't know what the best trauma bonding, maybe like
Yes.
this
Mhm.
kind of, my life is a mess right now, and so I'm going to join this organization, um, with the hopes of solving whatever problems were happening in my life. When Freemasonry is I love Freemasonry, but I don't know if it's always the best place to deal with some of these traumatic issues, especially if
Yeah.
you've not dealt with them anywhere else.
Yeah, I am a big believer in therapy for everybody across the board. I even talk to my own therapist. Um it but I will say I have been a therapist for 17 years now. I can probably count on two hands how many men I have seen in that time because men just don't reach out for the same mental health support like women do. I would love to see that shift and change. I do think it's changing because I see a lot of very poor coping skills in men. I see an inability to even know how to express emotions appropriately. I see a lot of it coming out in anger or numbing with cell phones, numbing with alcohol, and things like that. And so, while I think you're exactly right, while joining a civic organization or anything can be super duper beneficial, we also can't go around dumping our trauma and our toxicity on other people. So we don't want to kind of pass the buck to somebody else in an organization when really we're showing up for friendship, for camaraderie. It might help us heal, but it can't be our only mechanism for healing what's gone on in our life.
Yeah, I think in I used to know the term for it back from my um, I was never a social worker, but I worked with a lot. I was worked in the criminal justice system.
Oh, okay.
I can't think of what it was called. It's like it was when somebody first gets active in drug or alcohol rehabilitation, like AA or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
They get, I think it's called the pink cloud. They get super into it and they're super active in it, and
Yes.
it kind of it's their entire life. But they're doing that as a way to not think about whatever traumas led them to the problems in the first
Correct.
place, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I do think sometimes with Freemasonry there can be that element where people are joining, um, not they're joining because they don't want to think about the other things in their life that aren't
Mm-hmm.
going well. Um,
Yes.
which I mean, and in fairness, I suppose there is some benefit to that as a coping mechanism, right? Like you see
Mm-hmm.
that with kids a lot when they're coming from abusive situations where it's like sometimes they'll be overachievers in school because it's
Mm-hmm.
like if I can't fix
That.
what's happening at
Mhm.
home, so I'll just focus, which does seem probably like one of the healthier ways to deal with something. But especially when you get older, I think if you're not dealing with the underlying issues as well, then sooner or
Mhm.
later it might pop up all over again.
Correct. And I will say, to be fair, jujitsu attracts a lot of military veterans. It attracts a lot of police and other corrections, which, they've got lots of trauma that they usually haven't dealt with. Ultra running also attracts a lot of people in recovery. It also attracts a lot of people that have been through a lot because, I mean, let's be honest, who says like, "Oh, 26 miles isn't enough. Let's add some more miles to that." You gotta be a little off in the brain to say like, "Oh, yeah, that's what I wanna do for funsies."
We're all a little bit off.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think that that's just a really fascinating kind of uh, point to make, right? Like, what is the purpose of joining something? Why do you join something? And is in because in theory, like jujitsu is always going to be good, right? It's
Mhm,
healthy, it's at physical activity. In theory, running is always going to be good. But when
mhm.
does the thing that you're joining become in and of itself, or are you joining always for the right reasons, or whatever it might
Yeah.
be? I mean, my general kind of idea of it has always been the reason to join anything is to make the thing better,
Mhm,
right? As a rule, as opposed to kind of what it is you can get out of it.
mhm.
Instead, so if you're joining a football team, the goal should be you want to be the best player on the team so you can make the team better or your job or whatever it might. Same with Freemasonry, right? Um, the theory is, right, if you're joining, it's because you want to contribute something to the
Yeah.
lodge and then to the larger community. Um, if you're in a mental or physical state where you feel like you can contribute, then maybe the focus should start being on fixing yourself through therapy and then looking in at.
Yeah, I heard this kind of distilled down the other day and it really resonated with me where something can be therapeutic, but it's not therapy. So for me, running has been therapeutic, but it's not a replacement for therapy. And so I feel like joining a Mason group could be one of those things too, where it could be very therapeutic in joining a community, making new friends, getting out in the community, but it is not a replacement for actual therapy.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good way to look at it because then also having therapy as well as taking care of yourself physically, there's one of my favorite parts of Freemasonry, and one of the things I love about it, there's a part in our initiation where they talk about the necessity of taking care of yourself mentally and physically. And the reason that they tell you to do that is not so you will feel better, although that's obviously a byproduct of it. The reason
Mhm.
they tell you to take care of yourself is because the healthier you are mentally and physically, and the more educated you are and the more time you take to learn about things, the more you do all of that stuff, the better you'll be able to help others and the better
Mhm.
you'll be able to kind of exert whatever natural talents you have, right? I'm sure
Yeah.
you see the same. You said, right, you yourself go to therapy because,
Mhm.
right, I'm assuming part of it is you feel very passionate about your work, and by going to therapy, you're able to take care of yourself, and that helps you then do your work better and take care of others.
Correct. Correct. Yes, exactly. Mhm.
So I think that to me has always been one of the parts I love about Freemasonry, right? And it's important so I always tell Masons, right? It's important to take care of yourself outside the lodge so you can give as much of yourself as possible to the lodge when it's time for
Mhm.
lodge meeting or to
Yeah.
Freemasonry.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that something I've been kind of playing around with a little bit, and you've probably got some good ideas, I would think, would be kind of self care in a Masonic context. So we have a lot of older members. We have a lot of so they suffering from mobility impairments. They're older. They maybe need a cane or something like that. Also, our meetings tend to be very sedentary. Their
Mhm.
business meetings, they're kind of by definition boring. Our ritual
Mhm.
is a lot of which boring doesn't mean bad, by the way. I'm just going to put that out there for any Masons watching this. Masons love to complain about boring business meetings. Sometimes boring things are important, Sometimes those
Yes.
things matter. But nonetheless, there's a lot of sitting around during especially a business meeting. From your, as a professional, what are some things that you think maybe we could do during a meeting to encourage self-care? I mean, one example, we had somebody on talking about breathing exercises.
Mhm.
There's been discussions around, guided meditation, um,
Yes.
some gentle stretching. But what would you suggest are some ways that we could incorporate self-care into a Masonic meeting? Maybe if we put aside, let's say, the last 15 minutes for some type of self-care. What are some ideas you would have?
Yeah, I love guided meditation because sorry, I'm fighting off the colds that my kids have been bringing home since the start of school. Um the guided meditation. So our imaginations are very powerful. And so when we are in our mind imagining something, our brain doesn't know the difference between what we've made up in our mind and reality. And so if there is a piece of getting into that place of relaxation and peace, and then you start to bring in some visualization, some intention setting, but even some movement of the body. There is a lot of benefit to the muscles, even in imagining that you are working out, imagining that you're walking. And I always believe that nature is very healing. And so then if you can bring in all of the senses and incorporate some of the elements of nature, then that would be a really powerful guided meditation. I actually do walk and talk therapy sessions with people. We have in my area the old railroad trail or old railroad tracks that are no longer in use in some areas are turned into walking, biking, etc. trails. And so sometimes I meet a client at the trailhead and we walk and talk. And so that is really therapeutic and beneficial. So even if some of the meetings, like there might be rituals that need to happen in a certain area, but then even if it went outside or there was a lap around, even with mobility issues, I still believe that people can be moving their bodies in whatever ways, to whatever extent that they are able to. I saw you going all around. You made more laps than anybody at the at the event at the end of September. And so, you're moving your upper body, you're moving your arms, you're getting your heart pumping and your blood flowing. So, yeah, I think any type of movement to whatever people's capabilities are would be excellent for overall health and mental health and well-being too.
And the
Oh, I can't hear you.
all right, can you hear me now?
Oh, now I can hear you.
There we go. Second there, I lost the audio wasn't working right. The but yeah, and I do love the idea of the walk and talk. I think that's really cool. And yeah, I agree with you 100%. Like anybody, in my opinion, whatever mobility you're at, you can do something, right?
Mhm.
You can, you can walk if you can walk, if you're in a wheelchair, if you need a walker, if you need a cane, even if you're in a situation where, you can't necessarily move out of the wheelchair or whatever it is, you can still kind of move your upper body, move your shoulders. You can find a
Mhm.
way to make it work. And, seated, even being seated, but doing stretching and stuff, I think can be
Mhm.
really, really helpful. Um, before we finish this interview, and thank you so much for being on it. I did want to talk to you. One of my favorite things about you and something that, or about your company or your work, I should say, that brought me to you. I really like the name Celebrate Every Step, right?
Mhm.
And I think it's very easy, especially we talked about earlier. People are so busy now, and there's always something going on. Um, it can be very easy to forget to celebrate the successes in the day-to-day life, right? Whatever it might be, which
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what I took from that celebrating every step is this idea of taking a moment every day to celebrate whatever small things you may have accomplished on the road to the bigger things, and even maybe in a way celebrating the setbacks in that you were able
Mhm.
to overcome them or that you will overcome them. um, just out of curiosity, where did that name Celebrate Every Step come from?
Yeah, so it came about as kind of the play on the words of I love to walk and run and hike. And one of the things that I incorporated was celebrating basically every step I took out there because I've had a lot of health issues throughout my life. I've been pregnant 4 times. And sometimes you can't get out and move your body in the ways that you want to. And so over time, I've learned to have a lot of gratitude for not fighting against when my body feels like it's fighting against me, but actually being able to celebrate that. I actually started my business after I had my second son. And so it was also celebrating every step in parenting because a lot of the stages felt like, oh my gosh, this is awful. But I don't want my mindset to be that. I don't want to think about how terrible things are when you're not sleeping and the baby is up and fussing and it's just a nonstop thing. I wanted to be able to celebrate like, okay, this is the time. This is the time to bond. This is the time to snuggle. Every little thing that I was doing for them mattered at that time, is the skin to skin, um, helping them develop their neck muscles. Um, so it was a play on many different layers in my life of celebrating the steps of parenthood, celebrating the steps I was able to take um, in my business and then in actual physical steps as well. And now I look at it more on the mental health and emotional health side of if somebody is depressed and they haven't showered in 3 days and we can get them to the point where they're feeling good enough to take a shower, okay, well then we need to celebrate that step. Now, there's a lot of people out there that are like, big deal. Who cares? I took a shower today. For some people, that is a big deal. And so just getting in that mindset of celebrating accomplishments from the minutia to the big, um, from being in the present moment so that you can actually enjoy and appreciate where you are and what you've accomplished. Again, big and small. It doesn't have to be huge things. It can be I survived another day. So that's kind of where it all came from. So thank you for noticing it because I do love my business name.
No, I loved it too, and it's one of the things that um, when I was, in Johnstown and then came back and was looking at different potential podcast guests, right? I remember specifically yourself, and I remember specifically celebrate every step. I remember getting the dog oracle, which I haven't told my cat yet, but I remember
No
those
hard
things as well.
feelings. No hard feelings.
You tell that to Bandit. Cats can be quite persnickety about those
Yes,
type of
I have
things.
3 cats and 3 dogs, and it's an interesting dynamic sometimes.
It's yeah, I've always been a cat person. It's probably because I grew up with them, right?
Mhm.
My dad was a cat person too, but I've always loved cats. But I liked the oracle I got as well. I thought that was
Mhm.
really cool. Where can we where can people find you in the, because you mentioned, right, it's the season, so I'm assuming you have some more expos coming up, as well as I know your
Yeah.
business online, right? I'll put the website in the description, but where can people find you coming up?
Yeah, I have one more event for spooky season. I have the Halloween Vegan Festival in Pittsburgh, and that will be November 1st. It's going to be an amazing event. I'm so excited. There's belly dancing and there's some Samhain rituals. I mean, it's just going to be such a dynamic event. And then there's vegan treats for kids and for dogs. So people can bring their pets, and there's going to be rescue animals there. And so it's a very dynamic event. So I'm super excited for that one. And then otherwise, I am Celebrate Every Step on Facebook, Instagram, my podcast, and my website are all the same. So I would love to connect with some of your people if they like what I had to say.
Is your podcast focused on like the same thing as your work, right? Spiritual, just kind of spiritual work and spirituality in that field, as well as mental health and
Yes, it's primarily focused on that. I know a lot of cool people. And so I have them come on and tell me their life story and how they got to what they're doing. So, yeah, I have everything from shamans to other mediums, tarot readers. I do have some other things that I throw in there, like there is an organ donation episode. And so I kind of do whatever I feel like I want to do, but it's all focused on people living their best life and living their authentic purpose and how they were able to do that. I also work with a lot of people on traumatic grief. I lost my brother to suicide 17 years ago. I lost my son. And so other people who have had traumatic losses tend to find their way towards me. And so I have other people on that have written books and do a lot of grief work as well. And so we talk about their avenues for helping people through those journeys.
yeah, I'm sorry to hear about those losses, but
Thank you.
the fact that you're helping people who will have experienced similar things,
Mhm.
I think is wonderful. Also, again, just because I love it, I got to give a shout out to organ donation and all. I huge support. I wish more people would take the time to fill out those. I don't know what it's like in Pennsylvania, but in Ontario, I think in all of Canada, right? When you get your driver's license or
Mhm.
your health card, there's just a form you fill out, and it's there and it's on the record. Everybody should do that, in my opinion. Put it in your will
Yeah,
as well, all that
I
good jazz.
yeah, I agree, and there are the 2 opportunities for living donation, so kidney and liver. Women can also donate their eggs, and then, like I said at the beginning too, I just did the cheek swab. It's super simple, and then you go into a registry for bone marrow donation, and then you talked about blood donation, and my mom used to do apheresis, so that's where they spun out the blood. So there are lots of opportunities to help our fellow humans who might have some health issues and give a part of ourselves for that. It definitely has been a wild ride with donating a kidney, but I wouldn't change it. It was amazing.
I mean that's an awesome thing that you did, right? And this, delving into a little bit of controversy because I've heard different stories about it, but I'm sticking with the story I heard. To my knowledge, blood donation was actually started by Freemasons in London. Um,
Oh.
I've heard other people have disputed that, but I believe that's what I have heard, and I forget the
Yeah.
source. But yeah, blood donation was started in London, England,
Hmm.
by Freemasons. So that is the story I was told. I think it's true. I mean, Freemasonry and blood donation was like, even when I started in 2007, because numbers have dropped, it's kind of not as connected. But there was a time when Freemasons were kind of known as being one of the primary sources of blood donations was Masonic
That's
lodges, and there was
fantastic. Yeah.
competitions amongst lodges as to how many members would donate and all that
Hmm.
stuff. I also
That's
gotta
wonderful.
give a shout out to you. Oh, I'm gonna give myself some credit here as an avid horror movie fan. When you said Wayne, I really knew you're talking about. That's from Halloween. In
Yes.
because they spell it Samhain, but it's
Yes.
actually pronounced Wayne. I know that because I love scary movies and I love Halloween.
Yes.
So I had to give that a shout out. I felt really proud of myself in that moment.
Yes, I
I'm gonna
know, that is
celebrate
a
that step.
yeah. Well, and I live in Punxsutawney, where we have Groundhog Day, and so it's my daughter and I looked into the history of it and how it came about, and that's another one where it falls right on embolic and also Candlemas and Catholicism, so there's so many layers to a lot of these rituals and holidays and things like that, so it's fun to look at all the history of those things.
That's really, really cool. One of my maybe my favorite book of all, well, second favorite. My favorite is Don Quixote, but my second favorite book, The Long Walk by Stephen King. He wrote it as Richard Bachman way back in the day, which is going to be turned into a movie, actually. Side
Oh.
note. But I love The Long Walk, and there's this part in the book I really love, and it reminded me of something you were talking about. Where I mean, it's Stephen King book, so it's obviously a scary story, but it's really well written. But there's this one part where basically it's these kids are forced to like march until they can't march anymore. But
Oh, okay.
there's this one part where they start in Maine on the border between Canada and the U.S. and
Mhm.
they basically are walking, and at some point there's like five of them left, and they make it to the border of Massachusetts or something.
Mm.
And then there's this sign and it says like only 49 miles to go until Boston or something. Like
Mhm.
you can do it, right? And one of the walkers is like, what a stupid word is only, right? Like,
Yeah.
and he talks about how like he would strike it from the English language if he could. And even though it's a very different context in that book, I latched on, and to this point, like I will use the most tortured language to avoid using the word only, because
Mhm.
I've grown to hate that word. But I that goes back to what you were saying, and that kind of think is a good place to end it. I loved what you're talking about. Like it's not only a shower if they haven't showered for 3 days,
Mhm.
right? It's not
Yep.
only whether it's a big step or a little step. It's not only a little. It's still a step. We're celebrating,
Yes.
right? And
Mhm.
so I mean, Stephen King was using a different context, but I think both him and you were correct in that. Yeah, don't diminish the successes, right? And I think that's kind of what you do so well, based on the little I've had a chance to talk with you, and also this podcast, right? It's making
Yeah.
sure that you do celebrate the successes and not
Mhm.
diminish them. And whether it's taking a shower after 3 days, or running a marathon, or getting a blue belt in jujitsu, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Celebrating those steps. So I think that's
Yes.
awesome.
Absolutely. This was so wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on. It was really fun to learn more about Freemasonry from you and just get to connect with you at the expo and then here today. So thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. I had a blast. And yeah, everybody check out the description to this video. Figure out how to get in touch with Celebrate Every Step. Thank you so much. Because you do, I know this interview keeps going longer and longer, but
It's
I'll throw
fine.
it in there, right? Because we have people, and a lot of my audience is Ontario, but it's from all
Mhm.
over, right? You do virtual and
Yes.
different types of readings and things through Zoom and virtual, as well as in person. So even if I have, audience members as far away as like Romania, they can find you
Mhm.
as well and talk to you.
Yes, absolutely. So I have my license in Pennsylvania, and that's how I bill insurance. But then I also have my clinical hypnotherapy and past life regression certifications. And so those are the sessions that I offer online. And yes, I have had several clients from Canada. I have actually had a client from Poland. And so I can see people anywhere with that. And I love connecting with people from all over. So I would love to hear from your people if they are interested in what I do.
Very awesome. All right. Thank you again so much.
Thank you.